Dust lifted in sheets, then snapped flat, as if the ridge were breathing. Captain Tessa Klein tasted grit through the paper dryness in her mouth and pressed the radio to the cradle of her jaw. The A-10’s rumbled somewhere beyond the overcast. Low, heavy, a furnace behind a curtain. Sandy 11, this is Sapphire. Window opens in 60 seconds. Her voice rode the static like a blade. On the slope below, friendlies hugged a notch of shattered shale. Tracers stitched the dark. Not lines, but sewing needles. The outflow boundary she'd chased all day was arriving ahead of schedule. Barometric pressure falling, wind shearing through the valley throat. She checked the kestrel, checked the flagging grass, checked the small tremor in her wrist, and set it aside like a tool she did not need. Copy, Sapphire. The flight lead's voice was steady glass. We'll take the east-west. Confirm PID, danger close authority. PID maintained. Type 2 control. Stay outside the schoolhouse grid. Collateral threshold 0. The words were doctrine, but the timing was blood. The storm line would collapse visibility for the gunners in 90 seconds. For the A-10’s, it would drop the ceiling just enough to put them below the crosswind shear, rails aligned with the ravine. Her window, her knife edge. A gust smacked her helmet. The smell, ozone baked over dust and hot metal, bit the back of her tongue. A man below screamed for a medic, and the sound cut off like a switch. She lit the smoke, a thin orange thread in gray air. Sandy 11, mark is hot. Wind 320 at 25, gusts 35. Ilum breaks in 10. This is the last clean corridor. The cloud shelf folded, and the valley's light dimmed as if someone had drawn a shade. A shape punched through, gray, tusked, purposeful. The GAU-8 thunder didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like a door closing on a different world. Tessa kept the radio close, breath shallow, counting, not seconds, but decisions. The storm would have its way. The only thing she could own was the moment it met her will. Sandy 11, now! Brass fell like rain she'd refused to predict. 72 hours earlier, Bob Guardian, the forecast plotter, lied the way paper lies, flat, clean, sure of itself. Outside the tent, heat lifted off the tarmac in oily shimmers. Inside, Captain Tessa Klein breathed in the plastic tang of laminated maps and the bitter edge of stale coffee. The fluorescent tube above her ticked in a rhythm that didn't match her pulse. She set the kestrel on the table and waited for its digits to stop twitching. Wind 220 at 8, gust 12. Dry adiabatic laps telegraphed a pop-up cell by late afternoon if the outflow remnant held together over the low ridge. She pinched the bridge of her nose, then made herself stop. Habits told stories she didn't want the room to read. "Weather guesser," one of the sergeants said from the doorway, half smile, half test. It was old banter. It still found soft places. Tessa didn't look up. "If you guess with instruments, it's still a measurement." She clicked the anemometer cap into place, checked the spare batteries, reseated the comms relay. Her hands moved with the impersonal calm she'd learned in labs and lost in valleys. She'd rebuilt that calm from smaller pieces. Count to 4 on the inhale, hold, count to 4 on the exhale. Do it until the body follows orders again. Major Cole from Ops leaned in, forearms pressing the map table. "We're green for a low-visibility patrol, schoolhouse quadrant. JTAC is McCord. You'll push with them, advise only. ROE is strict, PID required, CDE 0. If civilians move into the grid, we hold." She nodded once. The rules were a corridor as narrow as any ravine. A-10’s? Sandy flight on strip alert. They'll check in on your timing. Cole's tone made the word "your sound" provisional. Don't overcomplicate this. We've got a window. Late afternoon before sunset. You tell me if we lose it. Tessa folded a grease pencil into her palm to keep her fingers from drumming. Overcomplicate was another word for notice things. She lifted the thermal camera, watched the world ghost into grayscale layers, heat pooling in the berms and vehicle hoods. Outside, a pilot walked across the apron with a helmet tucked against her ribs. Even through the door flap, Tessa could feel the throb of engines turning somewhere beyond the hangars. Warthogs had a way of saturating the senses. The eye counted rivets. The ear learned what thunder meant when it came machine-made. Later, on the radio check with Sandy 11, the voice that answered carried an ease earned from long, ugly days. Sapphire, Sandy 11, good check. She didn't ask if they'd meant the call sign as a joke. Meteorologists got gemstones, pilots got teeth. Sandy 11, winds currently 220 at 8, gust 12. Expect shift to 310 with outflow in the last hour of light. I like an east-west run if we go kinetic. A beat. Copy your east-west. JTAC will clear us if such time arrives, the pilot said, boundary lines wrapped in courtesy. We'll keep the cannons bored and patient. Patience saves ammo, she said, and wished she hadn't. It sounded like a lesson. It sounded like she remembered the taste of a night she didn't fix. When the briefing broke, the team filtered into the hard brightness beside the tent. McCord, the JTAC, checked his tablet, then glanced up. You ride in the middle, ma'am. Keep the toys close. If I say quiet, you go to weather only. Weather only, as if there were a clean border. Understood, she said. He was younger than she'd expected, face still wide in the way of people whose edges hadn't been sanded by too many reports. A scar bisected his eyebrow, pale as chalk. On the move, the valley organized, itself into facts. Heat haze on the road that thickened, then thinned. A laminar line along the ridge grass that lifted and lay down in pulses. Schoolhouse windows reflecting sky like broken mirrors. Children had once traced letters in that room. She marked an offset aim point on her map to keep the fight from ever remembering them. Halfway to the wadi, her alert chirped. A quick bird's call. She slid the kestrel free, pressure falling faster than modeled. She looked up. The cloud shelf on the horizon had cinched a belt of shadow around the far hills. McCord glanced over. Bad? Fast, she said. Fast wasn't bad until it outpaced the plan. She keyed her net. Sandy 11, Sapphire. Outflow moving earlier than forecast. If we end up employing, window likely shifts left by 30. You stating uncertainty or preference? The pilot asked, almost amused. Observation, she said. Then, after a breath that steadied itself before she could be proud of it. Preference to align with observation. Beside her, one of the sergeants muttered, "Spicy weather." She didn't smile. The air tasted like pennies. They took the wadi at a slow crawl, careful of scrap and glass. A donkey stood in a rectangle of shade near the school wall, chewing something that might once have been shoes. Tessa watched its ears flick against the flies and thought about signs too small for doctrine. If the wind slid harder across the valley throat, dust would lift and hang, and the enemy's best view would become a rumor. It wouldn't hide friendlies, nothing ever did, but it might thicken the world enough to favor patience. At the observation point, McCord popped his strobe to test the IR blink. ROE reminder, he said, as if she didn't know. No shots without PID. School grid is cold unless we're dying. She nodded. Understood. She could feel the line inside herself where fear stood waiting for a chance to call itself certainty. She met it the way you meet weather, not with belief, but with measurement. Wind 230, gusts building, pressure falling. The ridgegrass lay down again, then rose in a wave that traveled edge to edge with a grace that had nothing to do with humans. She put her pencil on the map and drew a corridor that didn't exist yet. Window, she said softly, to no one and to everyone. Grease lived in everything at the motor pool, under the nails, along the seams of cases, faintly metallic in the air the way rain sometimes is before it falls. Tessa opened the Pelican lid and laid out her kit with the order of a ritual. Kestrel, spare impellers, laser rangefinder, thermal imager, IR chem lights, comms relay, laminated map, pencil stub worn to its last comfort. She wiped dust out of the Kestrel's inlet with a rolled swab until the cotton showed clean. The anemometer spun once in her palm from the lightest exhale. Not data. She set it down. Tell me the future, Doc, a mechanic said, dragging a hose. His smile held no malice. Even so, the word snagged. Future meant certainty. Weather offered only odds and witnesses. She clipped the Kestrel to the mast on her pack, ran the tether to a shoulder D-ring, then thumbed through the menu tree. She killed the default gust alarm and built her own. Outflow threshold at 15 knots over steady wind, sustained 5 seconds. Barrow drop at 1.5 millibars in 10 minutes. Shear cue keyed to the anemometer and a cheap windsock she'd stitched from orange tape. The device chirped as she saved, a decision written into plastic. Across the lot, McCord checked the patrol's radios. We're on PRC 163 primary, VHF alt. You'll ride my net unless it gets stupid, then you float to Sandy. Copy. She looped the comms relay through her harness, tested side tone, then keyed the A-10 check frequency. Carrier hiss came back steady as surf. The noise sounded like winter to her. Afternoons in a Midwestern basement where sirens sent families underground. You learn to read the pressure drop in your own bones. You learn not to say that out loud to people who trusted instruments more than bodies. A young corporal paused by her table, eyeing the thermal camera. Ma'am, do you call lightning? Lightning doesn't take requests, she said. She pointed the lens at his boots. They bloomed bright in the display. I watch boundaries. Boundaries move people. He laughed, then seemed to realize she meant it. Roger. She powered the relay and got the faint bite of ozone from warm electronics. The screen bloomed, menus crisp. She built a page for the school grid. No fire ring hard drawn at 100 meters, 200-meter caution hash for ricochet. She added a corridor along the ravine where an east-west run might live if the world cooperated. It would not. But a map was not a promise. It was a sentence waiting for verbs. Ops Major Cole walked through with a clipboard, eyes sweeping the line. We roll on the hour. If the sky misbehaves, we can push 30. I'd prefer not to. Understood, Tessa said. You are advisory, he added, as if confirming gravity. Advisory, she echoed. The word sat in her throat like a coin. She swallowed it. She took the mast outside into the heat and watched the windsock she'd taped to its tip. It barely lifted. Far to the west, clouds shredded against the ridge like dark wool on wire. A line of dust rode the road in slow coils behind a forklift. The forklift mattered. The dust showed how the valley tugged at air, where eddies formed, how grit might hang when the outflow pushed through. She set the Kestrel to sample faster than default, hungry for shifts most people never noticed. Hey, Sapphire! A voice from behind, Sandy 11, the same warm, laconic tone from the radio, now stepping out of a flight suit with sleeves tied at the waist. The pilot's hair held the mark of a helmet. Her eyes weighed Tessa's gear with interest instead of doubt. You building your own storm alarms? Trying to hear the first domino, Tessa said. That gets us to the second. The pilot glanced at the windsock. You still like east-west? If the outflow keeps its shape, we turn away from the school and keep the ricochet cone clean. If the ceiling drops 300, east-west keeps you under the worst shear. Copy the Y. The pilot's approval was a small nod, nothing more. It landed heavier than praise. When the pilot left, the sergeant from the doorway earlier wandered over. No offense, ma'am, but if it's gonna rain A-10’s, I don't think your windsock saves us. It's not for saving us, Tessa said. She tightened the mast clamp. It's to make the window real when it's too small to see. He chewed that. Copy. Back inside, she scrolled to the custom alert page and hesitated. The standard gust cue would probably be fine. So would the standard shear alarm. Fine built reports. Fine didn't catch edges. She opened the settings again and carved them sharper. Lower threshold, shorter sample window, louder chirp. Aggressive. It would go off sooner, and if she trusted it, she would move people sooner. If she was wrong, she would move them into nothing. Her thumb hovered. The fluorescent hum seemed to climb in pitch and press against her teeth. In the corner, Cole signed a form with the bored speed of someone who would own none of the decisions that mattered once the sky changed color. Tessa pressed save. She backed up the profile to the relay, named it Sapphire 0.1. There would be no undo in the field. That was the point. On the patrol net, McCord's voice checked through call signs with quick, clean cadence. Strobes green, lasers cold unless called, PID or we don't breathe. CDE 0 near the schoolhouse. 0 means 0. Tessa glanced at her map and drew the ring again, darker. ROE was a wall. She preferred walls. They told you where you weren't allowed to lie. Her watch ticked into the last minutes before step-off. She weighed the pack on her shoulders, felt the mast sway once in the furnace breeze, adjusted straps until the weight settled across bone instead of soft tissue. She tapped the Kestrel's screen with the side of a finger to wake it. The numbers steadied. The windsock lifted half an inch and drooped. A memory tried to climb out of a deeper place, the night when patience cost a chance to act, when a window slid past because the model said, wait. She set the memory on the table in her mind, next to the pencil stub, and left it there. Not denied, accounted for. McCord appeared at her elbow. We're a-goin' too. You ride center. If I say quiet. Weather only, she said. Good. He looked at the mast, at the taped windsock. Ugly. Useful, she said. The first, alert chirped, soft as a bird testing morning. Not gust. Pressure trend. She felt the hair on her forearms ruffle, then settle. Out west, the ridge seemed a shade darker than it had been a heartbeat before. Copy, she said to no one and to the sky. She tucked the relay into her harness, sealed the Pelican, and lifted the pack. The corridor on her map didn't exist yet. She'd built the door anyway. Heat lay on the flight line like a sheet of glass. JP-8 curled in the air, sweet, solvent, a memory you could taste. Tessa shaded her eyes with the edge of a laminated map as an A-10 taxied slow, tusked, the gun muzzle a black pupil that never blinked. The engines didn't roar so much as insist. The sound filled the bones and waited there. Her radio ticked. Sapphire, Sandy 1-1, check. She keyed. Sandy 1-1, good check. Winds 220 at 10, gust 15. Expect shift to 30 with outflow an hour earlier than modeled. East-west axis preferred if employed. A pause long enough to be a raised eyebrow. Copy your expectation. JTAC owns clearance. We'll hold in standard stack until he sings. Understood. She didn't need to say she knew the hierarchy. FACA, JTAC, she lived in the spaces between their words. Sandy 12 eased up behind lead, canopy glass winking sky into mirrors. A crew chief slapped a panel with a ringed hand. Habit, superstition, love. The pilot from earlier, sleeves tied, helmet mark in her hair, angled in under the nacelle shade and tipped her head toward Tessa's taped windsock mast, now planted at the edge of the apron. Respect without ceremony. Tessa held up 2 fingers, east-west, then tapped the map at the ravine's mouth. The pilot's eyes narrowed, tracking. She lifted a hand in a straight line, then hooked it slightly, as if cutting under something unseen. She got it. Sheer. Tessa's alert chirped. The sound was small under the engines, but her body moved to it before her mind did. She checked the Kestrel. Pressure trend bending harder than the model liked. The cloud shelf to the west wasn't advancing. It was tilting. The kind of posture that meant a boundary would spill over the ridge like a bucket tipped slow, then sudden. The flight lead came on again, drier now, testing. Sapphire, confirm your corridor concept. She sighted along the ridge line with her pencil, as if the graphite could reach the air itself. If we employ, request east-west attack along ravine floor, initial from the east, to keep ricochet cone away from the schoolhouse grid. Outflow will lower the ceiling 300 and clean the lane for 90 seconds under shear. You're pushing a gun solution, not PGM. Affirm. Lazing through that dust will be theater. She heard her own voice and was grateful it landed steady. Gun meant the line was real, inches, not promises that flew on rails. Shut JTAC still clears the trigger. He does. I'm handing you the door when it opens. Silence again, the kind full of counting. She thought of the last time she'd waited on the line for a door that never opened, because she'd believed the model over her skin. She'd written a long paragraph in a report to apologize to numbers. Numbers hadn't answered. McCord's icon blinked on her map, green in the wadi, moving. She watched the school grid circle sit like a coin on the page. Cold unless dying, ROE said. She liked rules that cut clean. They made decisions ring true when you struck them. The pilot's voice returned, softer at the edges. We'll carry your east-west in the stack notes. If JTAC degrades, FACA retains authority. You give us wins, marks, and restrictions. Copy. Danger close parameters loaded. Mark will be orange. Orange it is. The crew chiefs finished their dances. The A-10’s rolled, turned, lifted with that stubborn grace that made them look too heavy for the sky until the sky accepted the bargain. The engine's insistence thinned into a high, far thread. Tessa stood in the heat after they'd gone and let her muscles register the absence, the way field quiet can feel louder than turbines. A shadow slid across her map. Major Cole. You just wrote their approach, Captain? I wrote their constraints, she said. Same thing if something goes wrong. She didn't look up. Different thing if it goes right. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out level anyway. He made a sound that might have been a laugh and walked off, satisfied to own neither outcome. She pulled the relay tight into her harness and started toward the vehicles. The windsock twitched, then held. The first real gust would come like a thought you couldn't swallow. Between now and then, there would be 100 small tells. She would watch all of them and try to hear the one that mattered. "Sapphire," Sandy 11 called from altitude now, calm as if she were in an office chair with a view. "Playtime 20 mics on station. We'll hold south. Call corridor." "Copy 20 mics. Recommend offset left-hand pattern to favor egress away from the school grid." "Copy offset." She walked the edge of the apron to the gate and paused with one hand on the hot metal. The pilots would circle in blue space where wind was a number and a feel. Down here, the wind pushed dust into your teeth and made your throat taste like pennies. The sky would make its move. She would make hers inside it. The checkpoint guard lifted the barrier. She stepped through. Commitment lived somewhere you couldn't point to on a map. She felt it settle behind her ribs, where weather used to frighten her as a kid in basement darkness while sirens pulsed. She had learned then that storms didn't hate you. They didn't know you. You worked the edges they gave. You didn't talk louder to be heard. You placed the call when the door cracked and took the responsibility for the price. Sandy 11, Sapphire, East-West annotated, expect shift left 30. "We'll be there." Her kestrel chirped again. One tick, eager. She smiled without softness, folded the map, and headed for the wadi. The convoy rolled in low gear, engines murmuring like a warning under the heat. Dust boiled up, then thinned into veils that clung to the skin and the inside of the mouth. Tessa rode center bench. Pack straps crossed hard over her clavicles, mast swaying once with each rut. The kestrel tapped a soft rhythm against her chest plate. She kept one glove open so fingertips could feel the air move. The valley narrowed early. Stone shelves stepped down into the wadi, pale and flaked, as if the whole place had been carved by a patient knife. Ahead, the schoolhouse sat square and empty-eyed, windows reflecting sky in ragged shapes. A boy's bicycle leaned against a wall where no boy waited. Two women crossed the far edge of the grid with plastic jugs balanced against their hips, veils pulled close, wind tugging cloth into quiet flags. "Eyes on sieve pattern," McCord said over the net, voice even. "School grid is cold." "Copy," Tessa answered. She lifted the thermal imager. Heat pooled in the concrete apron and the iron fence posts. The women's figures glowed and moved out toward the well. A stray dog flickered past as a smear, ribs bright under hide. Wind ran a thumb across the valley and changed the pitch of everything. The clatter of a loose tailgate, the sawtooth rattle of gravel, the breath inside her helmet. Pressure trend down, gust interval shortening. The outflow wasn't here yet. It was leaning in. "Mark it," McCord said, "if we need it." Tessa stepped off the track and walked the edge of the ravine where the east-west corridor might live if the sky decided to be useful. The rock under her boot had a chalky give to it, like old bone. She squinted into the light and found the angle where Ricochet Risk bent away from the school walls. The line didn't exist until someone believed it. She put her pencil on the map and pushed. "Offset mark," she said. 150 meters south of the school grid. Orange smoke if employed. Lane favors east-west, initial from the east. Ricochet cone clear of the structure by triple-digit meters. McCord looked over, not unkind. "You sure?" "Sure as we get." She let the words stand. RO was a wall. The wall made her steady. PID required. No fires within 100 of the school unless troops in contact. CDE 0. The letters sat heavy in her head and cooled the urge to be early. A pair of pickups idled high on the ridge beyond the school, unmarked, sun flashing on glass. Not moving in, not moving away. watching. The wind found them and smeared their dust into the skies blue like a thumb across charcoal. Sandy 1-1 Sapphire. Her voice stayed low, conversation level. Mark grid established, corridor geometry update. Outflow left 30 minutes from prior. Maintain stack south. Recommend left-hand pattern for egress away from the school grid. Copy Sapphire. We hold south. Your winds when they turn. The kestrel chirped, not loud, just present. She flicked her eyes to the numbers without giving them her face. Pressure skidded lower, then steadied. Wind backed 2 degrees. Gusts climbed. The taped windsock at the mast's tip lifted another finger's width, then trembled as if listening. A goat wandered out from behind the schoolhouse and chewed at a strip of paper. The paper flashed white, then folded, then was gone. Small tells, all of them useless until they were not. She walked the offset and checked angles with the laser rangefinder, then with her body. A toe against stone, a hip shift, a line drawn with the shoulder to measure air. The ravine floor offered a shallow trough that would hold dust once the boundary dumped. The dust would turn the world into something like milk. Through milk, lasing was a magic trick. Through milk, guns spoke plain. Danger close matrix updated, she said, almost to herself, but the net caught it. Burst limits set. Copy burst, McCord said. Let's hope we never see it. She took a knee and pulled the orange smoke from her pouch. The cap's paint had chipped back home and left a bright ring of clean metal that cut the finger if you weren't careful. She set it down ahead of time, a promise to the sky. When she looked up, the women had reached the well and were working the handle, backs bowed, rhythm patient. Wind lifted their scarves and set them down again. ROE remains unchanged, McCord said. He didn't have to. They said it to hear it. PID or nothing. School is cold unless we're dying. Copy. The word came flat and true. No debate lived near it. The mark she'd drawn stole options away. That was why it mattered. Later, when the air went gray and the ridge started to breathe, no one would ask for another geometry. The door would be where she'd put it. Static scratched the patrol net. 1, 2, 3 small teeth marks. Then the kind of silence that meant people were holding their breath. The pickups on the ridge edged forward a meter and stopped again. A figure got out, long shirt snapping in the gust, and brought a phone to his ear. The ridge behind him went a shade darker. Wind's shifting, Tessa said. Not loud. The words didn't need volume. They needed to land. The kestrel chirped again, this time the outflow cue she'd carved into the plastic at the motor pool. Aggressive threshold. Early by model. Right by skin. Sandy 1-1 Sapphire. Outflow forming. Expect ceiling to drop 300. Corridor viable east-west for 90 seconds once the shelf breaks. Copy shelf. Standing by. Tessa raised her head and watched grass on the ridge lie down one way, then the other, then all at once the same direction. A sheet lifted, then snapped flat. The taste of pennies rode up the back of the tongue and sat there like a coin no one would spend. She looked at the offset mark on her map and put her finger on it as if pressure could fix it to the earth. Decision became place. Place became boundary. The sky would come to meet it or not. Orange smoke goes here, she said. Then that's the door, McCord answered. The mast ticked once in the growing wind. She closed her glove and tightened the strap until it dug into bone. No part of her shook. The tremor would find time later. Not now. Window will be small, she said. Small's still a window, McCord said. The first specks of dust lifted from the ravine floor and hung in the light like seed. She kept her eyes on them and on the school and on the empty rectangle where the door would open. The first shot snapped the light in half. Gravel spat against her sleeve. A radio hiss flared and cut. "Contact! Ridge!" someone barked, too loud in the net. A second shot slapped the stone shelf above her head and left a chalky cough in the air. The school's blank windows held still, reflecting sky like dull blades. "Troops in contact. North Ridge." McCord's voice was tight, controlled. "Sandy, stand by for 9 line." The wind shouldered in and made the mast creak. Tessa dropped to a knee behind a ledge and pulled the kestrel up against her vest so the screen wouldn't shine. Pressure drop accelerated. Gusts stacked in shorter ladders. The shelf would break soon. When it did, dust would pour along the ravine like water tipped into a trough. Sapphire wind. McCord. 280 at 25, gust 35, rising, outflow imminent. On the ridge, figures flickered between rocks, shirts snapping. The unmarked pickups had crept farther forward. Their glass flashed and vanished. A burst of fire chewed the lip of the wadi and sprayed pebbles. Heat brought the stink of hot metal. Her tongue tasted copper. A dog yelped once and went silent. Sandy 1-1 on station. The pilot's voice came cool over the storming ground noise. "We can take east-west if cleared." ROA crowded the inside of Tessa's skull in neat, cold letters. PID required. CDE 0 near school. The school's ring on her map glowered like a warning light. Through this much dust, a bomb was theater. Gun had a chance. Too early, and the ricochet cone would scratch the school's edge. Too late, and the point man would bleed out behind a rock that had never promised to be enough. Her alert chirped a sharp, new cadence, the aggressive threshold she'd written into plastic. Breath in 4. Hold. Out 4. The storm line was not a line so much as a hand dragging its knuckles through the valley. Another burst lashed the patrol's front and blew grit into her eyes. She blinked once, hard, and the world steadied. Sapphire. Sandy 11 again. Urgency hidden under manners. Say corridor. She stared at the schoolhouse grid. The women at the well had gone. Only the donkey's shade remained, a blank square of mercy. She slid the orange smoke halfway from its pouch and left it. Not yet. Stormline advancing. Hold munitions. Reposition. She made the call flat, all the velocity pressed out of it. Adjust to left-hand pattern south. Expect a 90-second window when the shelf breaks. A beat. 2. Leadership is sometimes the space you don't let get filled by panic. Copy hold. Repositioning left hand. Sandy 11, steady. Negative type 3, McCord added, as if daring someone to forget. PID or we're statues. Static clawed the net. Another voice stepped on the transmission. Civilian. And then nothing. The wind arrived in a single hard push that set every stray wrapper in the wadi to tumbling. Dust lifted and hung. The ridgegrass lay down in one direction, then held. The sky dimmed by a fraction, enough to close a pupil. Rounds walked along the rock to her right. The corporal beside her started to rabbit. His shoulders rose, breath turned rabbit fast. Tessa's hand found his strobe, snapped it to a clean blink, then pressed his forearm just above the watchband, 1, 2, until his breath matched the count. He nodded, eyes still too big, but the blink steadied. The IR diamonds up and down the line began to look like a thing someone could manage instead of a scattering of fear. Sapphire, say winds. 320 at 28, gust 35. Sheer across the ravine mouth, expect low-level roll. East-west remains preferred. She drew her finger across the map's thin, invented lane and felt the graphite catch on laminated scratches. Reality had friction. Good. A ricochet whined down and pinged off the mast. The taped windsock slapped flat against its pole, then shouldered out again with sudden purpose. A fine hiss built at the edge of hearing where dust met air the wrong way. The shelf broke. Sandy 1-1, Sapphire, corridor forming, ceiling down 300, east-west viable in 90. Copy, holding south. McCord rose to paint a mark, and a round snapped him back. He folded down as if someone had cut a string. No flail, no drama, just a wrong angle of shoulder and helmet. The radio thunked against stone and kept talking to no one. The world got very particular. Tessa slid on knees and knuckles, reached him, and saw breath moving, shallow there. Blood made a dark coin under his plate carrier, not spreading fast. She tucked the radio back into his harness, keyed his net, and gave the medics a floor plan in 3 words. They were already moving. "JTAC down!" Someone called on the patrol net, too loud. Noise like that made rooms inside heads. Tessa kept her voice low. "Medics on, IR strobes steady, maintain PID." She pulled the relay tight against her sternum, as if closeness could make signal stronger. Her world narrowed to 3 anchors. The school ring, the ravine lane, the sound of the wind grinding dust into a single gray milk that would hide and reveal by turns. Sandy 1-1, Sapphire, JTAC injured, FACA retains clearance. You will not get cleared hot from me. You will get constraints, wins, and mark. A half-second of silence carried a kind of respect. Copy constraints. We're with you. A fresh crackle across the net hinted at jamming or the storm's own teeth chewing the spectrum. She turned her head, using her helmet and the rock to block a sliver of that noise, and the hiss cleaned up enough to read her numbers. Ceiling 650 AGL, visibility variable, dust line holding on ravine floor, orange mark on my call. Keep ricochet cone off school grid. The dust thickened until the far pickups blurred to smudges. Someone shouted for a tourniquet, and another voice answered calm, already doing it. Tessa put the orange smoke where her map said the door would be, but didn't pull the cap. Not yet. Breath in, hold, out. 4 and 4, and under the count a smaller count, another kind learned alone with sirens and basement concrete. "Window in 60, she said. "Stand by." The radio on McCord's chest ticked against stone like an insect. He blinked once, slow, and she put 2 fingers on his shoulder where he could feel pressure without pain. Stay. Thunder built behind the overcast. The A-10’s turning down toward the valley lip, patient and heavy. The school's blank windows watched their own dim reflections. Dust in threads you could almost pluck. Tessa checked the wind again and let the call come up into her mouth. Not pushed, not delayed, just placed. Sandy 1-1, mark in 10. A round cracked the ledge overhead and showered them with grit. She didn't duck. There wasn't time for smaller weather. 5. McCord's breath steadied into a shallow rhythm that counted itself. 3-2. She yanked the cap, and the smoke blossomed orange in the gray like a promise finally kept. Mark is hot. Copy mark. The GAU-8's door hadn't closed yet. It would. Orange bled into the dust and held. The smoke line tugged sideways, a small flag telling the sky which way the valley breathed. Medics slid in beside McCord. Gloves, gauze, the little metal snip of shears against nylon. His eyes tracked, present. Breath shallow, counting itself. 2 nets piled into her headset at once. Patrol on one shoulder, air on the other. The storm chewed, both into a low burr. Sapphire, Sandy 1-1, tally orange, say clearance. She pinched the radio to her jaw, kept her voice level. Sandy 1-1, Sapphire, you will not receive clearance from me. FACA retains. Constraints follow. East-west only, initial from the east. Keep ricochet cones south of the school grid. Burst limit 3 seconds per pass. Danger close matrix posted. A breath of silence. Respect lived in silences like that. Copy constraints. FACA has control. The lead sounded closer, engine note leaning down the slope. The patrol net spiked, 2 voices at once, one asking for bandages, the other naming a ridge notch where muzzle flashes had shown then faded. Tessa shifted a foot and felt grit grind under her knee. The orange smoke frayed into wisps and found a steadier angle. She checked the Kestrel, blocked its screen with her glove to keep the light from printing on dust. Pressure still falling. Wind 320 at 2.8, gust 3.5. Sheer across the ravine mouth like a sideways thumb. The ceiling had sagged, not collapsed. 90 seconds would be real if the shelf kept its posture. Sandy 1-1, winds 320 at 2.8, gust 3.5. Sheer low across the ravine mouth, expect roll. Corridor holds east-west, school grid remains cold. Copy winds, copy cold grid. A corporal edged too far off the line, drawn by a blind urge to see. Tessa hooked his sleeve with 2 fingers and parked him behind a rock that would actually work. No speech. The rock did the teaching. Status JTAC? Sandy 11 again. She looked at McCord. Medics had a pressure dressing on. One tapped his wristwatch, counting quiet. JTAC injured, conscious, FACA owns clearance. She kept the phrase clean. The law of the net mattered when everything else slurred. We can go guns on your mark if FACA says the word. The sentence tempted and tested. She let it pass through and leave no print. Constraints stand. The wind carried copper to the back of her mouth, blood and hot metal. The schoolhouse windows showed her own small shape in a blur of orange and gray. In the reflection, the orange looked like fire. It wasn't. It was geometry. Sapphire, how long does your door stay open? The pilot's tone had lost its edge of challenge. Timing now, not skepticism. Tessa watched the grass on the ridge lie down, lift, lie down, rhythm finding itself. The outflow hadn't dumped hard yet. The dust on the ravine floor rolled in threads, not sheets. She measured with her eyes, then with the count under her breath. Estimate 90 seconds from shelf break. Copy 90 from break. A stutter of shots from the north ridge sent a scatter of stone across her sleeve. The medics hunched lower without looking up. McCord whispered something the dust ate. She leaned closer and caught only one word, window. He knew the shape of work, even with pain dragging at him. FACA, Sandy 1-1. We hold south for Type 2, guns per Sapphire constraints. The label settled something in the air. Type 2 meant eyes on target from the aircraft, controller not eyeballing the impact. It meant no pretending she could see what she could not. It meant trust with railings. She tugged the relay higher until the harness cut into her sternum. Pain helped anchor breath. Sandy 1-1. Keep egress southbound to avoid the grid. Displace right if crosswind spikes. I'll call when the shelf breaks. Copy south egress ready to reposition. A thin squeal laced the patrol net, jamming or a cheap handheld stepping on them. Tessa turned her head to make her own skull a baffle. The hiss cleaned enough to read the numbers again. Pressure decay steadied. Gust interval shortened. The shelf would tip soon. Not yet. Sapphire. Request cleared hot. Not from lead. Another voice. The kind that sits in operations tents and wants verbs before nouns. Coal? The comm smear made it hard to tell. She let the urge to answer die against the rules that kept people from dying for pride. Negative. Sapphire does not clear hot. FACA retains. She didn't add HUD by design. The design was the point. A pause, annoyed air moving across a mic somewhere far from dust. The line went quiet again. The corporal she'd parked started to shake, breath going ragged. She put her hand on the back of his glove, pressed once, then matched his inhale. 4 in, hold, 4 out. After 2 cycles, his shoulders lowered, strobe still blinking clean. The small work made the big work possible. Overhead, the engines deepened. The valley answered with its own bass. Wind through a throat not built for it. The orange at her boots streamed sideways with more conviction. Sandy 1-1, shelf near break. She didn't raise her voice. Stand by. Standing! McCord's hand found the radio on his chest and patted it once like a pocket check. The smallest nod, she returned it. If she said now, too early, ricochet risk bent toward the school. If she said it too late, the dust would go solid and the lane would vanish. She watched the thin seam where light met shadow along the ridge and waited for the instant it jumped tracks. The seam twitched, then ran. Air went from rough to smooth in a single breath. Dust lifted and didn't settle. The ravine mouth turned to milk and then to a cleaner stripe through milk, a paradox she had chased in notebooks and basements her whole life. Not yet. Sapphire, Sandy 11 again, closer inside her helmet. Hold. A single syllable placed. She felt the count rise in her chest. 1, 2, 3, the space between decision and speech narrowing to a hinge. Sapphire, when? Influence without rank is a promise kept on time. On break, you'll have 9-0. She let the last word carry the weight. I'll call you in. Copy, we're with you. The shelf broke. The radio nets seemed to quiet inside the roar, like a room taking a breath the moment before someone spoke. Stand by for corridor. Dust climbed the ravine walls and stayed there, a gray tide that forgot how to ebb. The orange smoke streamed east like thread pulled through cloth and never quite broke. Numbers on the kestrel steadied into a posture that wouldn't live long. Wind 320 at 28, gust 35. Pressure trend down, then flat. The shelf's shadow slipping along the ridge like a blade held in a slow hand. Sapphire, Sandy 1-1. We're south. 90 seconds to commit on your call. Type 2, guns. The model in her head still argued for patience, a polite slide to the right. The air in her teeth said otherwise. The seam along the ridge had begun to shimmer, not advance. Lift, not push. When seams lifted, the bucket tipped early. The patrol net popped. Contact North Ridge, muzzle flare. Ire strobe steady, Tessa said, quiet into the storm. The corporal's strobe blinked a clean diamond where she'd left it. Medics sealed a bandage and tucked McCord's arm closer to his chest, like you'd tuck a sleeping child. The school windows stayed dumb and reflective. The ring on her map a hard no that steadied the hand. Ops bled into the airnet with a voice that lived far from dust. Sandy, confirm triggers. FAC A retains clearance. Sandy 11 answered before she had to. The pilot's tone had lost the sandpaper. Sapphire, you feed the door. The ridge grass took a collective breath and lay flat. Dust at the ravine mouth rolled, then flattened into a smoother band, a paradoxical clarity in a world going blind. Slant-range math ran in Tessa's jaw where she set her molars. East-west initial from the east. Mills conservative. Burst 3 seconds. Egress southbound. Ricochet cone clear of the school by comfort and more. The model still wanted later. Her skin didn't. Sandy 11, Sapphire. Window shifts left 30. Commit on my mark at T-30 from planned. No apology, no hedge. If she took it back, the stack would stretch and wobble and never forgive her. A pause that carried the cost. Copy shift left 30, re-racking pattern now. Fuel and geometry moved in the sky because of a sentence she'd just said. That was a weight bodies felt. Her hand settled on the radio without squeeze. Breath in 4, hold, out 4. The count waited for her. She didn't have to hunt it. Constraints unchanged, she added. East-west, initial from the east. Burst limit 3 seconds. Egress south. School grid remains cold. Constraints copied. FACA. Confirm. A new voice. Crisp. Owned the trigger. FACA confirms. Type 2. Guns. Per constraints. The wind reached into the ravine and changed the sound of everything. Smaller rattles vanished, bigger ones spoke up. Somewhere a piece of tin sang one clean note and then fell silent. The orange smoke trembled in the new laminar layer and drew a straight line as if eager to be read. Sapphire, say wins final. 320 at 28, gust 35. Sheer low across the mouth. Expect roll. Corridor holds. The words placed themselves. Too late and they would be documentary. Too early and they would be fiction. They landed where events would soon agree or not. The corporal beside her found a noise in his throat and shut it down like a switch. She pressed 2 fingers to the stone once and let the grit bite. Pain recruited focus. The school windows continued to show only sky and the thin ghost of orange, no faces. Ops came again, thinner in the storm. Sapphire, are you certain? Sapphire is not clearing hot, she said, not turning her head, not spending any extra breath. Fax A retains. Silence swallowed the tent voice and kept it. Sandy 11 in 60, the pilot said, the sound of heavy things becoming precise. The plan they'd written an hour ago lay on the map like a museum piece. This was the living version. Early, lean, necessary. She pictured the run. Initial from the east. Nose just enough down to keep dispersion tight. Gun within burst limits. Tracers falling short of the ring like a promise kept in public. In 30, Sandy 11, dust thickened. And then, counter to sense, the lane grew cleaner. The ravine's throat scoured into clarity by the very wind that blinded everything else. The shelf above the ridge jumped a finger width higher. Ceiling lowered by the exact amount her bones had wagered. No turning back, lived past this second. Sandy 11, now. The sky answered with intent. Engine note bent into gravity. The Warthog's presence pressed against the valley walls. Not the eager rip of jets, but the patient certainty of mass. Final checks, she said. Ricochet cone south, 3-second burst. Abort if tracers flirt with the grid. The word flirt put teeth on the rule. Everyone heard it. Copy 3 second, abort on flirt. Even the pilot's humor stayed within ROE. The ravine's light dimmed half a shade. The lane she'd conjured held open as if braced by careful hands. Somewhere behind her teeth, a childhood siren that used to own her went quiet. Not conquered. Reassigned. Sandy 1-1 in. A line drawn across air. Guns. The first syllables of thunder collected behind the overcast and rolled down into the valley's ribs. Dust lifted and shivered. The school's windows held their own reflections. No more. Correct 2 right, Tessa said, voice even. A small hinge turned at the right time. Wind pushed. 2 right, the pilot acknowledged, and the thunder found its focus. She didn't watch for impacts. Impacts were not her job. Her job was the lane, the timing, the limit. She let the seconds count her instead, the way a metronome counts a player. 3 seconds arrives faster when you owe people outcomes. Off south, Sandy 11 called, and the engine note climbed. Sandy 1-2 setting up. Corridor holds for 6-0, Tessa said. 1-2, you're next. The heaviness moved, precise, obeying rules written on dust. Somewhere behind her, a medic laughed once in relief and then apologized to the air for the noise. The apology felt right. The window would not stay generous. It never did. 1-2 in 15. The orange thread still drew true. The school ring stayed a clean circle on a map that had become a place. Tessa set a palm on stone, anchored herself to it, and let the second run arrive. Sandy 11 climbed out south, engine note easing as if someone released a held breath. The orange thread still streamed east, truer now that the shelf had broken. On the ridge, shapes that had been rocks became men again, muzzles poking and vanishing, patient as lizards. Sandy 1-2 in 15, the wingman called. Guns. A smudge moved at the schoolhouse doorway. Not a shooter's posture, too tentative, too vertical. A head, a scarf, the dust made liars of distances. ROE burned cold across Tessa's mind. CDE 0 near the grid. You didn't argue with 0, she keyed low. Hold 1-2. Possible civilian movement at schoolhouse doorway. Grid remains cold. Ops bled in from somewhere clean and far away. We need effects now. If you've got a shot, take it. Negative ordnance near grid, Tessa said, calm enough to cool the channel. Recommend show of force, east-west, dry, flares on egress. Displace ridgeline contacts away from the school. A beat of air, then Faucier, crisp, sapphire, justify. She watched the dust roll smooth along the ravine and the orange line hold like a vein. Ceiling down, dust up, PGM degraded. Gun remains viable but civilian pattern uncertain. Dry pass buys 30 seconds to pull shooters south and right, away from the grid. Then guns. Sandy 12 came back cool but eager. We can drag them. Your corridor still good after? Holds for 6-0 after pass if the shelf keeps posture. Ops again, impatience in a tie knot. This is time wasted. Tessa didn't spend a word on him. She aimed at the only authority that mattered here. FACA. ROE allows show of force, no ordnance, flares discouraged over grid. Show of force authorized. FACA said, owning the risk. No ordnance, no flares over the grid, flares south of it only. 1-2, dry east-west, initial east, aggressive noise. Egress south, pop 2. Copy dry east-west, pop south side. Sandy 12's voice curved into a grin you could hear. In 10. The corporal next to Tessa twitched like a runner at blocks. She pressed his sleeve, a touch that said, "Hold." He held. Across the ridge, a figure raised a phone again, recording or pretending. The dust made the gesture float. At the school door, the smudge shifted, then withdrew. The smallest relief warmed her ribs and evaporated. 1-2 in. The Warthog came low enough for the valley to feel the weight of its intent. No fire, just presence. The TF-34s poured a steady grind that set grit vibrating on stone. The broad wings shouldered air until the ravine walls hummed. The sound didn't scare so much as correct. Men jerked back from their perches by reflex older than doctrine. "Now south," Tessa said. Pop. 2 white flowers of heat pin-pricked the dust line on egress, legal south of the ring, bright enough to tattoo the air. The flare smoke smeared into the wind and dragged attention with it, away from the school wall's dumb square of reflection. Effect observed, Tessa added, soft. Ridge contacts shifting right 30 meters. The numbers steadied the room inside the radios. Ops returned, clipped, already rewriting ownership. "Fine, now finish it." She let his voice pass like a gust that moved only loose things. The important weight stayed. Sandy 11, Sapphire. Corridor holds east-west. You are cleared. She stopped herself. The habit of language tried to lean beyond its rail. Constraints. Guns only, initial from the east. Burst limit 3 seconds. Southbound egress. FACA retains clearance. FACA cleared hot per constraints. Type 2 guns. The controller said, "No drama, all spine." Copy cleared hot. 1-1 turning in. The lead again, voice now with a grain of respect that hadn't been there in the first brief. Tessa checked the wind. 320 at 27, gust easing, the seam holding steady. The orange thread ran like a guide wire. Her hand lay flat on stone. Grit printed crescents in her palm. She thought of basements and sirens and a girl counting heartbeats to find a calm that didn't belong to her yet. She thought of the door she'd built here, on a day that considered everyone equally unimportant. The schoolhouse reflection kept its lie of emptiness. Good. Let it lie. 1-1 final, guns. Confirm 2 right, she said. Same hinge as before, half a degree carved out of air. 2 right. The ravine took the thunder and sent it back in a deeper register. The burst stayed tight. Tracers cupped south of the forbidden ring, sparks walking the ridge where the phones had been. Men who had been rocks became fleeing streaks, then smaller smudges, then nothing. Off south. Sandy 11. 1-2 setting up. Corridor good for 40. 1-2, your lane is clean. She felt the clock in her chest shorten its ticks. 30 seconds had been the show of force dividend. She'd spent it well. No applause lived in that arithmetic. Only room. McCord stirred beside her, focus narrowing in through pain. His hand lifted an inch, fell back, lifted again. She pressed his shoulder gently and watched the medics work in practiced, quiet motions. Tourniquet check, dressing, the nod that meant still ours. On the ridge, a single muzzle flash sputtered, isolated and late. Tessa didn't speak to it. The lane spoke enough. 1-2 in. The air thickened with intent again, the way weather does right before it tips. She felt the tremor look for her wrist and fail to find it. Mercy had bought time. Time would buy survival. Survival would buy nothing that showed on ribbons. 3 seconds, she reminded the sky. 3 seconds. The sky answered and obeyed. The wind didn't roar so much as change its handwriting. What had been clean script turned jagged. Grit stuttered across stone in short, mean dashes. The orange smoke line trembled, then kinked as if someone pinched it between finger and thumb. "Spike in crosswind," Tessa said low. 325 at 33, gust 40, shear increasing across the mouth. "Sandy 1-2, setting up." The wingman sounded eager and patient in the same breath. "Call corrections." Ops tried to wedge in again, voice from an air-conditioned world. "We need effects now." She gave that breath to the numbers instead. Slant range through milk. Dive shallow to keep dispersion tight. Shallow risks ricochet. Steep risks overshoot in the dust. She felt her tongue press once, twice against a back molar, the old count returning like a friend who never asked questions. McCord's breath rasped at her knee, steady enough to belong to someone not going anywhere. A medic's gloved hand flashed 2 fingers at her, still good, and dropped out of sight. "FAA." Tessa said, "Danger close acceptance from GFC required if we bring rounds inside 150. Rules kept people from spending courage like cash. GFC accepts risk." FACA came back clean as a stamp. Type 2, guns per constraints. The acceptance landed in her chest with a weight that made other choices easier to lift. Tessa pinched the radio to her jaw. 1-2, shift to conservative mills. 3-second burst becomes 2. Aim 2 right. Nose down decimal 5 to tighten cone. Egress south. Abort if tracers even flirt with the grid. Copy 2-second burst. 2 right. Decimal 5 nose down. She almost added a prayer, replaced it with a breath. The dust strobed in her goggles. The world flickered between frames where men were rocks and rocks were men. The school's blank windows held their lie like a promise. Sapphire, say wins final. 325 at 33, gust 40, corridor still east-west, ricochet cone must stay south. 1-2 in. Intent pressed the valley flat as the A-10 shouldered under the shelf. Tessa didn't watch for targets. Targets belonged to someone else. She watched the line she'd drawn in air and the way the orange thread tried to curl and then thought better of it. "Correct one right," she said. The hinge turned at the exact moment alignment wanted to slip. Crosswind nibbled. "Hold 2 seconds. 1 right, holding 2, guns." Thunder met stone and the ravine exhaled grit. The burst cut off clean, no greed in it. Rounds walked the ridge's south face and stayed south. Tight pattern, no stray. The orange thread snapped back true. Off south, 1-2. Effects observed. Ops arrived to own the past. Good hits. Keep it coming. Tessa kept the room small. Corridor holds for 3-0. Crosswind still high. 1-1 recommend same conservative mills, 2-second burst. Maintain south egress. Copy in 20. Lead's tone had changed again. Respect with a memory of earlier skepticism rubbed out. The corporal beside her started to pant like he'd misplaced his diaphragm. She pressed 2 fingers to the ridge of his glove and matched his breath. 4 in. Hold. 4 out. He nodded, eyes reduced to necessary size. On the ridge, a solitary muzzle flash hiccuped and went out. The phone man was gone. Dust lifted in sheets and folded like drapery. Then the seam along the shelf rose a fraction, as if the sky had decided it preferred a different floor. "Shelf rising," she told the net. Sealing down additional 100. A lower ceiling made for kinder math, until it didn't. Closer meant louder, meant quicker corrections, or none at all. She felt the tremor hunt her wrist and fail again. 1-1 in, the pilot said. Guns. 2 right, now. Hold 1.8. She heard herself say it and believed the number because it arrived with the shape of the lane in her mouth. Abort if your tracers kiss that ring. The word kiss gave the rule skin. 1.8, abort on kiss. The GAU-8's door closed on another world and opened it somewhere else. Dust flared and collapsed. Tracers cupped the south face again and stopped obediently where they were told. No flirtations, no romance with the ring. Off south, 1-1. Bingo -10, 1-2 has one more in him. Corridor good for 2-0, Tessa said. Recommend final run, same constraints. Conservative mills, 2-second burst. The window's edges had begun to fray. She could feel the air losing interest in cooperation. McCord coughed once, a shallow, annoyed sound, and tried to shift. The medic's palm pressed him to stillness. Tessa placed 2 fingers on the radio at his harness and felt the tick through plastic. Alive. The knowledge cooled something feral inside her. 1-2 in 10, the wingman said, voice thinner with fuel math. The orange line shivered, then reasserted itself. The wind's handwriting got uglier but still legible. She could read it 1 sentence longer. 1-2 in. Correct decimal 5 left, she said. Crosswind just stole from you. 2 seconds, south egress, no exceptions. Decimal 5 left, 2 seconds. The burst came like a disciplined breath and cut clean. No drift. The ridge spat dust where men had been, then decided not to be a battlefield for a while. Off south, Winchester guns. Silence settled in that military way where silence still has jobs. The patrol net went to the quieter sounds. Velcro, clipped words. The medic's yes without syllables. Somewhere, too, the west, a sheet of tin rang once, and then made peace with the wind. Tessa checked the numbers and watched them stop being hers. The corridor began to blur, edges leaking back into weather instead of geometry. The shelf's seam lost interest and wandered. The orange smoke line sagged and then died. A thread cut clean. Window closing, she said. Recommend RTB for Sandy. Corridor will not hold. Copy RTB. 1-1 answered. Sapphire, good calls. She didn't say thank you. She wrote the praise down in her ribs where it would be useful later and keyed the ground net. Hold strobes. Check friendlies. We'll transition to Cassavac on FAC A's word. Ops tried one more time, softer, as if proximity to outcomes had changed the oxygen in their tent. Status of grid? Cold, she said. The word landed with the weight she meant. And it stays that way. Wind scraped the ravine in a new key. The math let go of her hand. She let go of it back. FAC A, Sapphire, corridor lost. Recommend we pivot to medevac planning. The reply came fast, grateful. Copy, casevac inbound. She eased her palm off the stone. Grit had printed tiny half-moons there, stamped in by pressure she hadn't felt at the time. She flexed her hand once and let the marks sting. There would be a different kind of weather now. The kind inside men who'd been close to becoming names. She'd help keep that steady, too. Twilight came early, smuggled in the folds of dust. The orange thread had withered to a smear on her boot, then nothing. Wind pressed grit into every seam of fabric, a slow grinding that sounded like patience losing interest. Cassavac inbound, Pedro 5-1, 1 mics out. FACA called, voice clipped and close. IR discipline, strobes on, lasers cold and less tasked. Tessa checked the kestrel without letting it glow. Wind 320 at 26, gust easing, ceiling sagged like canvas after rain. She could taste pennies again, copper and old fear, then made herself swallow once, clean, as if the body were a tool that obeyed. The corporal started to breathe too fast. His strobe guttered, blinked, died. Panic from the gap and put its fingers in. He pawed at the pouch, fumbled the battery cap until plastic squealed. Tessa slid on one knee, the stone scraping her knee pad, and set her palm over his glove. No orders. She turned the strobe, seated the cap with a quarter turn that felt like closing a secret, clicked once. Infrared woke, a steady diamond only the right eyes could see. Hold here, she murmured, not more than a thread of voice. She lifted his wrist and counted with a thumb against the watch band. 4 in, hold, 4 out, until his breath joined the count. When she let his hand go, it stayed where she'd set it. McCord breathed shallow on her other side. Medics worked in small, purposeful circles. Gauze, pressure, tape. No chatter. The radio at his chest ticked against stone, alive, metronome steady. He blinked, found her in the dust, and gave the smallest nod a person could give without moving. Pedro 5-1, 1 minute. Came down the net. The rotor beat was only a rumor, but the air had begun to carry that particular thump you feel in bone before ear. Sapphire, confirm wind on final. FACA. 320 at 26, gust 30, she said, keeping it level. Recommend approach south to north along ravine. Flare south of grid. IR strobes on all friendlies. RO nested in the words like load-bearing studs. Ops tried to creep in, thinned by static. Any movement at the school? Grid remains cold, she answered, quick enough to keep the conversation from becoming an argument. The school windows reflected only a dirtier sky, no faces. Her map's ring stayed an idea with teeth. The corporal's breath hitched again when a stray tracer stitched the ridge. Late, panicked fire from someone who hadn't understood the fight was already over. She put 2 fingers on his sleeve and left them there, await more instruction than speech. His shoulders lowered a notch. The diamond blinked steady. A scrape of tin somewhere up valley sang and stopped. The wind shifted half a hair. Dust folded, unfolded. Basement sirens from another life tried climbing the ladder of her throat. The old Midwestern drill lit up. Stairs, canned peaches, the radio voice saying counties like curses. She let the memory bloom and then stepped back, an animal acknowledged, not fed. Pedro 5-1, tally IR strobes. A new voice cut in, a pilot's practical cheer. Angel 1 minute. Mark HLZ with IR if available, no visible. Negative visible, fax A. Sapphire, read me a clean pocket. She looked not at the whole ravine, but at a square of it no bigger than a room, where the wind curled and lost speed behind a tooth of rock. Pocket east of my smoke residue, 10 by 15, lee of spur, dust less turbulent. She pictured the helicopter's rotor wash clawing the world into chaos and offered it a softer place to land. Copy the 10 by 15, Pedro said. The rotors found her bones now, a reliable pounding, neither hurried nor lazy. A strobe flickered 3 positions down, wrong cadence. Double blink like a question. Someone's cap half on. Tessa moved again, low and quick, face turned so goggles wouldn't fill. She set the cap, tapped the casing, watched the diamond resolve to steady. No praise. No fiction about how close almost had been. All strobes steady, she told the net. Lasers cold. McCord swallowed and winced. Window? He rasped, a word reclaimed from pain. Small, she said, the honesty itself a sedative. Enough. The rotor noise rose into a statement. Dust lifted in, coherent sheets now, twined by the wash that wasn't here yet, but had claimed the air anyway. The corporal's breath matched the watchband. His hands stayed. Pedro 5-1, final, south to north. The pilot called. Call hazards. Power lines none, antennas none. Ridge west, throwing rotors. Keep right 2. She saw the line in her mouth as if she could draw with vowels. Pop south of grid only. 2 right, popping south. The helicopter shouldered into view. Not dramatic, just present. A machine doing a job in a world that didn't care about jobs. IR lamps washed the ravine in an invisible light only certain goggles translated into mercy. The dust wallowed and then organized around the disk into something like order. Medics moved McCord on the count they'd been keeping since before they knew it. Low and close, lift and slide. Tessa put her palm under the litter rail where rock bit through gloves and took more weight than she had to. The litter hummed against her hand. The body's electric refusal to give up. A flare blossomed south. Legal, brief, bright in another spectrum, and collapsed. The helicopter's skids kissed stone with a softness that made nonsense of its weight. Clear left, clear right. Pedro's crew chief called. Load 1. The corporal twitched toward the shadow of the rotor like a moth. Tessa caught his sleeve again, 2 fingers, the whole lesson. Wait on their hand, she said, and he did, because the hand arrived and waved him in, and the rule matched the moment. They slid McCord aboard with a single correction and no shouting. The crew chief's gloved fist thumped the hull twice. Ready. Tessa leaned close enough for McCord to see her helmet and nodded once. He answered with a blink that said he was filing her inside a place people keep the names of those who didn't waste their air. Pedro 5-1 lifting, the pilot said. Rotor thump climbed. Dust made a curtain and then a tail. Good work down there. Tessa didn't answer. She watched the diamond strobes hold true up and down the line, watched the dust slump back into a less mean posture, watched the school windows offer nothing but her small ghost in their glass. The siren inside her went quiet the way weather does when it has spent itself. Not victory, not loss, just a pressure change you feel in your ears. Sapphire FACO. The controller came in, new tension under professional calm. Outflow just jumped again, visibility going to soup in the next 2 mics. We may have to redraw the play. She looked at the seam along the ridge and saw it breathing wrong. Up, not forward, a bad habit forming. Roger, she said. Then we'll write a new door. The dust stopped behaving. It didn't lift and fall anymore. It pooled, then sloshed sideways as if the valley had tilted without telling anyone. The seam on. The ridge stepped up a finger width and refused to come forward. Ceiling sank. Sound went felt instead of heard. FAQ, she said, keeping her voice narrow enough to cut the hiss. Shelf rising, visibility degrading to soup within 2 mics. Corridor east-west, no longer reliable. Copy degraded. New flight checking in, Sandy 2122, 5 mics out. The controller's tone tried for calm and mostly made it. Ops bled across the net, thinned by weather. Hold positions. Wait for conditions to improve. Wait was a plan for people who weren't on a map. The ridge coughed out a thin, late string of fire. Panicked, inaccurate, still enough to turn breath shallow. McCord's litter shadow had disappeared into the dust. The corporal's IR diamond blinked steady. 3 more diamonds answered down the line in the cadence she'd set with her thumb on a watchband. The kestrel showed numbers that didn't promise anything good. Wind 330 at 30. Gusts still nipping at 40. Pressure easing like a tired lung. She put her palm to stone and felt grit grind into crescents again. The old embarrassment from a night of waiting tried to climb her throat. She met it with the math of what was in front of her, not what should be. Fact A, Sapphire. East-west is dead. Recommend dogleg run along ravine floor. Ingress west to east hugging the south wall. Short dogleg left at the bend. Egress south. Ricochet cone stays south of the grid. Guns only. Type 2. A beat. The beat contained fuel, lives, doctrine, and the memory of her last wrong weight. Sapphire, justify. Outflow has gone vertical. Lift, not push. East-west puts crosswind roll at the mouth and drifts tracers toward the school. The ravine's south wall gives us lee. Dogleg keeps burst tight and south. Ops stumbled back in, useless and certain. Negative, delay fire until... Fac A retains clearance. The controller cut him off, spine audible. Sandy 2-1, copy Sapphire's proposal? A new voice arrived, all business, a burr of confidence under it. Sandy 2-1 copies dogleg west to east, south wall, guns only, type 2. Tessa exhaled on a 4 count she didn't have to chase anymore. WAROE restated, PID required, CDE 0 in school grid, abort if PID lost, or tracers flirt the ring. Flirt gave the rule skin again. People hear skin. Copy ROE. She needed PID with no pictures. Ground, Sapphire, establish IR talk on, friendlies steady diamond cadence, break cadence to triple blink on my count to mark line. No lasers. Ground copies. Came back, calm from men who had already done the worst parts of today. Counting up. 1, 2, 3. Along the line, diamonds did as told. Triple blink in sequence, then went steady again. The negative space between them drew a living map. On the pilots could read. Sandy 2-1, PID via IR geometry. Friendlies are the steady diamonds forming a south arc. Target area is north of the arc, south of the ridge break, east of my smoke residue. 2-1 copies IR talk on. Visual on the geometry, no eyes on personnel. Type 2 appropriate. The wind hit a new pitch, a low saw through canvas. Dust ran like milk down the ravine, and then, perversely, carved a clean stripe in the lee of the south wall, a pocket like the one she'd given Pedro. Only longer, meaner, and exactly where she needed a lane. Sometimes the sky said no, and left a hinge anyway. Sandy 2-1 wins 330 at 30. Use conservative mills, 2-second burst, nose down decimal 5 at dogleg, egress south. Copy conservative 2 seconds, decimal 5 at dogleg. The school windows pretended to be sky. Her ring on the map stayed an idea with teeth. She put her finger on it anyway. A ritual that made geometry into place. Fac A, she said. Acceptance of danger, close inside 150 still stands. GFC accepts. Type 2 per constraints. The shame in her throat found no purchase and slipped. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a hinge seat into its socket. Sandy 2-1. In on the dogleg. Intent came down out of the overcast in a tone she recognized more by the way it pressed on her chest than by the pitch. Through milk, shape. Through noise, a line. Correct one right, she said, the hinge again, no breath wasted. Hold 2. 1 right, holding 2. Guns. Thunder took the ravine by the shoulders and shook once, efficiently. Tracers cupped the south face, then stitched through the dogleg with the obedience of a taut animal. Nothing flirted with her ring. The burst cut clean at 2 seconds and left the air ringing with grit. Off south. 2-1. 2-2 setting up same. Corridor holds for 6-0. The lie that the world was blind coughed and admitted a seam of order. On the patrol net, someone breathed out a word that was mostly relief and partly apology. She didn't catch it. Not her business. Her business was the lane. The ridge spit one last stubborn flash. She didn't honor it with speech. 2-2 in, the wingman called. 5 left at dogleg. Wind stole from you, she said. 2 seconds. Abort on kiss. 5 left. 2 seconds. The second burst ran like a measured sentence and ended on the period she'd given it. Dust slumped. The seam on the ridge lost interest in lifting. The valley remembered how to breathe in one direction at a time. Off south, BDA indeterminate through dust. 2-2 said. Honest. Copy indeterminate. No reattack, grid stays cold. She made the call as much for herself as the record. No greed, no victory, lapse. The door had opened. They'd walked through. It was closing. Ops came back softer, as if the tent had learned something about weather. Status? Patrol intact, Cassivac airborne, school grid cold. She kept the list spare so it would fit clean in the next report and the one after. The Kestrel's numbers stopped being a language and went back to being weather. The orange residue on the rock by her boot looked like rust now, not promise. The corporal's IR diamond held steady. She pressed 2 fingers to the stone one last time and let the half-moons sting. Sandy 2-1 RTB on fuel, the lead said. Sapphire, good lane. She wrote the praise down where it could work later and keyed the ground net. Reset, IR diamond steady. No visible light. We hold until the sky remembers itself. The sky would not remember. It would change again. She would too. That was the job. Dust turned the ravine into a long, dim room with the lights half off. The seam on the ridge rose another finger width and stayed there like a dare. Tessa pressed the radio to the cradle of her jaw and listened to the sky arrange itself. Sandy 3-1, 3-2 checking in, a new voice said. Steady, interested, not yet tired. 20 mics playtime. FAC copies, type 2 guns likely. The controller answered. Sapphire, your lane? The Kestrel's numbers held a posture she had learned to respect. Wind 330 at 30, gust easing to 35, pressure down, flat, then the slightest uptick. The kind of shift that promised the shelf would tilt again and smear whatever order she had made. The dogleg along the south wall still breathed clean, a pocket in a storm that wasn't supposed to have pockets. Ops found the net, voice thin with distance. Hold all effects until conditions improve. Hold would bleed courage into fear and fear into error. The corporal's IR diamond blinked steady. Down the line, 3 more diamonds answered, the arc she'd taught the pilots to read. The schoolhouse stayed a mirror pretending at innocence. ROE sat in her head like a wall with weight. PID required. CDE 0 near the grid. Abort if PID lost. Walls keep people from lying to themselves. FAC A, Sapphire. Corridor remains the dogleg west to east hugging the south wall. 2-second bursts, conservative mills, south egress. Window is short. Copy. Ops again, the tent voice angling for authority it didn't own. Negative, Delay. Tessa didn't raise her volume. Delaying risks the pocket closing. Gun through milk is the only honest tool. She let the sentence land without apology. Honesty was part of ROE too, even if the document never wrote it. Sandy 3-1 copies dogleg. We'll need timing, the pilot said. A woman's voice. Confident, warm iron. The seam along the ridge trembled. Dust lifted from the ravine floor in a smoother band. That paradox she'd learned. When everything else got noisier, one lane found discipline. 90 seconds would be real. Then the sky would shrug again and take it back. She felt the old urge to buy one more minute, to let the model catch up with her skin. That urge had a shape and a temperature. It always arrived with the taste of pennies. She put it on the table in her mind next to the pencil stub and did not touch it. FACA, she said. Danger close acceptance from GFC stands inside 150? Affirmed. The controller replied, clean as a stamp. Type 2 guns per constraints. Sandy 3-1 wins 330 at 30, gust 35. Expect low-level roll at the mouth. 2-second burst only. Ricochet cone must stay south of the school grid. Abort if tracers flirt the ring. Copy 2 seconds, abort on flirt. Ops pushed one last time. Captain, if this goes bad... Tessa let the if evaporate. It will be on my name, she said into the same channel, not defiant, accurate. Log that. She wasn't clearing hot. She was removing places to hide. The seam on the ridge twitched. The lane through milk sharpened like a line drawn with a ruler. Her body found the 4 count without needing permission. Breath in, hold, out. The count had been hers before the Air Force and would be hers afterward. Sandy 3-1, commit on my call, she said. 3-2, set high cover, egress south. 3-1, ready. 3-2, high. The first rotor wash far away from Pedro had rearranged the dust earlier. Now the valley answered a new weight. TF-34s turning down toward the dogleg, patient and inevitable. Sapphire, say when, the pilot invited. No edge left. Own the door, then own the price. She pressed her palm flat to rock until grit printed crescents. The school grid's ring glared up from the map. The corporal's IR diamond blinked in the cadence she had set, the thumb over a watch band. Everything that could be controlled was controlled. Stand by, she said, a hinge. Stand by. The seam lifted, not forward but up, exactly the move she needed to buy the dogleg one clean breath before the soup swallowed it. Now, she said, and heard her voice arrive in the pilot's ear as if they shared the same mouth. 3-1, now. 3-1 in. Constraints live, 2 seconds, south egress. She kept the words in order so the world would follow suit. Ops went quiet. FACA said nothing but stayed present, the way good controllers do when a call is about to aggregate into history. The A-10 shouldered under the shelf and the valley braced. Tessa didn't seek targets. She held the lane in her jaw. 2 degrees available right at the bend, decimal 5 nose, down, then off. Her hand hovered over the radio without squeezing. The thunder came like a door slamming somewhere you couldn't see. Dust thumped against stone and fell. Tracers cupped the south wall and stitched the dogleg with no romance for the ring. The burst clipped itself right at 2 seconds, obedient as a promise made in public. Off south, 3-1 called. 3-2 setting up. Corridor holds for 6-0, Tessa said. The count in her chest shortened to match the window. 3-2, same constraints. Decimal 5 left at bend. crosswind stealing. 3-2 in. Ops found a new tone. Quiet, as if the tent had learned to breathe with the valley. It didn't matter. She wasn't listening for them anymore. Hold 2, she said. Abort on kiss. The second burst arrived like a sentence that knew its period. South egress. Silence with work inside it. Off south. The count in her ribs reached 0 with the lane. The seam wobbled, lost its edge, sagged. The pocket unraveled. Window closed, she said. 3-1, 3-2 RTB on fuel. Copy RTB, Sapphire, solid calls, the pilot said. And then she was gone. Dwindling to a thread of pressure you feel in bone after sound has left. Tessa keyed the ground net. Reset IR diamonds. No visible. We hold the grid cold. She looked at the schoolhouse window's dull mirror and saw her small shape there. Orange residue dried to rust at her boot. The siren inside her sat down and went quiet. FACA returned, business resuming. We'll have Sandy 1-1 back from Hot Pit in 5. If the sky gives us one more line... It would, or it wouldn't. Either way, there would be a door, and she would own it or leave it alone, and that choice would have her name on it. I'll be ready, she said. The sky returned like a low drum. Sandy 11's engine note seeped into bone. Not loud, just heavier than thought. Dust lay in slow rivers along the ravine floor. The seam on the ridge lifted and held as if waiting for a word. Sapphire Sandy 1-1 back on station. The pilot sounded like she'd eaten grit and decided it was fine. Fuel gives us one clean play. FAC A copies Type 2 guns per constraints, the controller said, voice a rail to hang weight on. The Kestrel's digits steadied. 320 at 27, gust 33. Pressure nudged up a hair, enough to warn the pocket would unravel soon. The dogleg along the south wall still breathed a cleaner band, a room cut out of milk. She pressed the radio to the cradle of her jaw. Sandy 1-1 east to west along the dogleg, nose down 5 at the bend, 2-second burst, egress south. Ricochet cone must stay south of the school grid. Abort if tracers flirt the ring. Copy constraints. Ops tried to materialize, thinner now. Confirm PID and danger close authority. She didn't spend breath turning her head. PID maintained via IR geometry. FACA retains clearance. GFC accepts danger close inside 150. CDE 0 in the grid stands. The words stacked like bricks. The corporal's IR diamond blinked steady. 3 more answered down the line. Medics had long since packed absence where McCord had been. The school's windows showed only a dirtier sky. The seam quivered. She found 4 in, hold, 4 out. Count living in ribs, not head. Sandy 1-1. Window opens in 60 seconds. The sentence lived in her mouth with the muscle memory of the first time she'd said it. The moment the story had started for someone who wasn't here for the build. Copy. Confirm Type 2 control. Type 2 control. Stay outside the schoolhouse grid. Collateral threshold 0. Affirm. The wind shouldered the mast. The taped windsock slapped flat, then steadied as if it too had decided. She slid the orange smoke half out of its pouch. Not for show now, only to seam the lane's entrance with something real. Sandy 1-1. Mark is hot in 10. Wind 320 at 27, gust 33. Ilum breaks in 10. This is the last clean corridor. The words matched the memory. She let them. Dust thinned at the dogleg. Paradox made useful. The seam along the ridge rose 1 more finger width. She felt the tremor look for her wrist and fail. 5, she said. 3, 2. She yanked the cap. Orange climbed into gray and stretched east like a sentence that knew its period. Mark is hot. Copy mark. Inbound. She pictured the geometry in her jaw. Initial from the east, decimal 5 nose down, gun within 2. The pilot would see almost nothing and need everything. Correct 2 right, now, she said when the wind nibbled. Hinge turned exactly when the lane tried to slip. Hold 2. Abort on kiss. 2 right. Holding. Guns. The Jiao 8 arrived like a door slamming on a world no one wanted to stay in. The ravine shuddered. Dust jumped and fell. Tracers cupped the south wall and ran the dogleg with the obedience of a rule that had been explained in few, clean words. No flirtations with the ring. The burst clipped itself at 2 seconds and cut out clean, like restraint with a timer. Off south, Sandy 11 said, breathing once on the word. 1-2 is Winchester. We're it. The patrol net filled with small sounds. Velcro, a hiss of tape, a whispered count. The corporal's diamond blinked on time. Someone up valley tried one last shot, and the wind took it away. Corridor holds for 4-0, Tessa said. If you've got fuel for a sweep, we can drag stragglers south of the ring. Dry, no flares over the grid. Copy dry sweep. In 10. She checked. The wind, same numbers, the posture stiffer, tired. The seam quivered. Make the pass loud, she added, and the pilot's chuckle lived under the static like proof of breath. The Warthog shouldered through again, a presence more than a shape. No ordnance this time, only noise and mass, and the reminder that some machines exist to write endings. Men who had been rocks retreated into smaller definitions of courage. Effect observed. She let herself say it. It made the net a room where work had been done. Fuel says RTB, Sandy 11 called. Sapphire, solid lane. The praise landed where she kept such things, behind bone. A gust shoved the mast enough to complain. The orange thread thinned, then drooped. The seam on the ridge lost interest in holding itself together and dribbled back into weather. The pocket slackened. The door began to lift from its hinges. Window closed, she said. RTB approved. We'll hold the grid cold. Copy. See you on the tape, the pilot answered, and the engine note unhooked from the valley and went to find altitude. Silence arrived with jobs inside it. The school's mirrors did what mirrors do. The corporal's breathing matched the watchband without help. Somewhere to the west, the same sheet of tin gave a single tired ring and quit. Ops came in, cautious. Confirm effects and collateral. Patrol intact, no collateral. Grid remained cold, she said, saving him and herself from adjectives. She wrote a short AAR to herself in her head. Dogleg under vertical outflow, IR geometry workable, aggressive thresholds validated, show of force purchasing seconds, early correction worth the cost. FACA returned, tone back to daylight. Medevac clear. Sandy will cycle if the sky gives us another seam. The sky breathed wrong, then right, then forgot them. That too was a kind of mercy. She touched the orange residue with a gloved finger and left no mark. The tremor finally found her wrist, late, polite, and she let it have 60 seconds while no one needed the hand. Then she set it down, the way you set down an instrument after the note is held. Her radio was still warm against her jaw. Sapphire up, she said to no one in particular, and to the world in general, and the sentence felt like a small, sufficient prayer that had nothing to do with faith and everything to do with being present when it mattered. Silence came back with weight on it. Not peace. Weight. The kind that settles after a room has been spoken to sharply. Dust loosened its grip and draped itself along the ravine like cloth left out in weather. Somewhere a scrap of tin gave one dull note and thought better of continuing. All elements, IR diamond steady. No visible light, Tessa said, voice low enough to keep edges smooth. The corporal's blink held true, cadence learned against a watchband. Down the line, 3 more diamonds answered. A living map still taking orders from discipline. FACA checked in, businesslike. Sapphire, status grid, and friendlies. Grid remains cold. Friendlies intact. 1 Cassavac airborne. She kept the list short so it would fit cleanly on paper later. Paper mattered. Paper was where the sky got taught to someone who hadn't been there. Ops slid into the channel, cautious now. Good work from the flights. JTAC's medevac was timely. We'll capture lessons learned at debrief. She let the sentence pass like a gust too weak to move anything anchored. The flights had been good. McCord had been timely. None of that made the door open. It only meant people had used it. She pulled her notebook, the one with water-warped corners and a spine repaired with tape, and started a column where columns lived. OBS. Shelf lifted, not pushed. Wins. 330, 30G35. Lane. South wall dogleg viable under vertical outflow. Conservative mills, 2-second burst. Abort on flirt language increases compliance. Sieve pattern. Schoolhouse reflective only. 0 movement during effects. Words steadied the hand. The tremor tried and didn't find purchase. The corporal exhaled in a small, broken way, and then gathered himself. Ma'am, that noise. He didn't finish the thought. Doors closing, she said, as if it had a technical definition. Maybe it did now. She scanned the school windows through the thermal. Still cool, still empty of heat signatures. The ring on her map sat like a coin, bright because she kept polishing it. ROE liked polish. PID required, CDE 0, abort if PID lost. The letters had been cold at first. After enough dust and breath, they felt like a kind of mercy. A faint patter touched her sleeve. She glanced up. The cloud shelf had collapsed its posture into something softer, ragged, wet-bellied. Raindrops the size of coins arrived far apart, then closer, tapping grit into a paste that smelled like the first day of a new job. The wind's handwriting eased off italics. FAC A, light rain commencing, she reported. Visibility improving to usable milk. Recommend no re-attack. Effects achieved. Maintain grid cold. Copy no re-attack, the controller said, a tone that let a little relief show. We'll hold until the convoy's clear of the quadrant. Ops tried again, sounding like someone reaching for a coffee in a room where the cup wasn't theirs. For the record, initiating corrections from Sapphire were advisory in nature. Affirm advisory, she said, and wrote advisory in the margin next to door, and drew a small arrow between them. Influence had made the shot possible. Authority had fired it. She didn't need to blur those lines to keep the lesson. She switched to the patrol net. Strobes steady. Lasers cold. Consolidate on the spur. Count off by 2s before. Movement. Quiet orders put the air back in chests. A private asked if he could light a chem for his torn glove. Negative visible. Tape it and move. He did. Tape made more sense than light. Rain freckled the map. She folded the laminated edge over the dogleg notes and kept writing. Show of force dividend. 30's displacement of ridge contacts. Flares south only. Never over grid. She added the call that had felt like a risk and turned out right. Shift left, T30 count on the corridor. Body model when seam lifts. That wasn't poetry. It was a variable with a provenance. Sapphire, this is Sandy 1-1 on AUX. The pilot's voice came back, quiet in her ear as if not to disturb anyone. Fuel math said they should be far already. Maybe she'd clipped in before the tower took them. Good lane. Your abort on flirt saved me from greed. She disliked thanks because it never mentioned cost. Even so, she let a small part of her ribcage take the warmth and file it. Copy. Safe RTB. The rain found dust that had been heated to stubbornness and broke it. Smell changed. Wet canvas, hot metal cooling, stone giving up the day. An old basement siren flickered in the back of her skull and left without unpacking. Weather did that when it had been worked with, not against. Medics finished policing their kit, gauze, and wrappers squared away. No debris left to become a rumor. The corporal tugged his glove tight, strobe blinking steady through a drop-speckled lens. He managed a grin he didn't try to make big. She didn't return it. She let him keep it. Fails A, again. Need BDA verbiage for tape. Effects observed on ridge south of grid. Enemy fire ceased. No observed movement in schoolhouse. No collateral indications. IR geometry effective for Type 2 control through dust. She made the words tight enough to be carried somewhere unfriendly. Ops sighed across the net. Maybe at her. Maybe at the rain. We'll debrief at 2000. Bring your plots. I'll bring my thresholds, she said, a private joke with a public consequence. She underlined aggressive borrow gust cue and circled it. The device chirp that had sounded like a bird at dawn deserved an appendix in a manual with a paragraph that began, when the seam lifts. The patrol formed up by twos, diamonds still tidy. The rain put dots on the orange residue until it bled away into the rock. The schoolhouse offered a dull mirror to a sky that had decided to be ordinary again. She closed the notebook and tapped its spine against her glove. Habit, not superstition. Ground hold south route. She passed to FACA. We'll clear the quadrant slow. Copy. Good work, Sapphire. It didn't feel like good. It felt like appropriate. She let the word pass and did the checklist that no one asked her to do. Batteries partial, relay warm, mast intact, windsock torn, replace. She reached up, pulled the tape flag free, and pocketed it. A scrap of orange with the day ground into its fibers. The rain thickened to a steady whisper. She lifted her faceplate and let a few drops touch skin. Cold, cleaner than anything else had been. Somewhere on another net, traffic about chow and fuel and rotas had already started. The world had a way of insisting on next things. She thumbed the notebook open one last time and added a line at the bottom that didn't look like the others. Quiet is a capability. She didn't know where to file that. Maybe under SOP, maybe under PASM. Prayer. Sapphire up, she said to the empty part of the net, and started walking. Rain sloughed the dust into a smell like wet canvas and spent matches. The debrief tent breathed coffee and damp paperwork. Fluorescent light made everything a little too honest. On the record, Major Cole said, voice clipped to fit inside the recorder. Type 2 control, guns only, dogleg corridor along south wall. Grid stayed cold. He didn't look at her. He looked at the form. Advisory inputs from Sapphire factored. FACA retained clearance. Tessa kept her pencil still so it wouldn't betray the itch to correct verbs. Advisory was right. Useful, too. She slid her notebook across the table, opened to a page where her handwriting marched in straight lines. Proposed SOP ad. Aggressive Barrow Gust Q, IR talk on geometry for dust, abort on flirt phrase for ROE compliance, conservative mills under vertical outflow, show of force dividend timing. Cole skimmed. Rain tapped the tent like a slow applause no one wanted to claim. He grunted. We'll add a line to the TTP annex. A concession disguised as bureaucracy. He set the page aside as if it might catch on fire if he held it longer. 2 options for you, Captain. Desk and ops to push these updates, or you keep embedding with the patrols until we rotate out. His tone made desk sound like recovery, and embed sound like poor impulse control. Outside, a Warthog's turbines spooled, the low insistence you felt more in bone than ear. She let the sound settle between his sentence and her answer. The desk offered permanence. Forward offered context. Doctrine wrote itself better beside weather than behind glass. Cole waited. The recorder's red LED winked a steady heartbeat. She signed the AAR block with neat pressure and passed it back. Forward, she said. His eyes ticked up, a flicker of surprise darting behind caution. You'll own that choice. I already did. No volume in it, a measurement, not a boast. The tent flap snapped in a gust. Sandy 11, the pilot with the helmet mark in her hair, ducked inside with a file folder sealed in plastic. She tapped it with a knuckle. Tape from today, for whoever writes the footnotes. A glance at Tessa's notebook. A private smile. We're hot pitting and back up in 40. Expectation of weather? Tessa angled the kestrel to keep its glow off the canvas. Pressure nudged upward, small but honest. Wind had slept. It would wake cranky. Ceiling lifting a notch. Outflow posture lazy by mid-morning. You'll have usable milk in the troughs. Gun still your honest friend if dust wakes fast. Copy. The pilot turned to leave, then paused. Keep the phrase. Abort on flirt, stickier than a paragraph. Goes in the annex, Cole said, as if he just invented annexes. When they were gone, the tent grew its old hum. Cole recapped a pen with surgical care. If you embed, you're our weather voice at the pointy end. No freelance clearance calls. You know the ROE. PID required, she said, automatic. CDE 0 near protected grids. Abort if PID lost. Guns over rails and milk. FACA owns the trigger. Good. He slid the signed AAR toward a stack, then stopped. Change your batteries, your alarms. He couldn't say aggressive thresholds without making it sound like defiance. They're the point, she said. He didn't argue. He only nodded like a man who'd learned the difference between superstition and tools the hard way, and lifted the flap to the rain. Dawn found the motor pool washed clean in streaks. Her mast leaned where she'd left it. The taped windsock was a ragged tongue. She tore it free, smoothed a new strip from roll to pole, and trimmed the edge with a knife until it looked like something that might tell the truth. The kestrel woke in her palm and blinked toward steadiness. A young specialist jogged up, rucksack belts flapping, eyes elsewhere. He nearly banged the mast. Sorry, ma'am. Heard you're riding again. Tessa tied the last knot and tested the kink with a small tug. We all are, she said. She pointed at his strobe. Seat the cap, quarter turn. He obeyed. IR came up a diamond, steady and obedient. Hold that cadence even when you want to breathe weird. Roger. The patrol loaded slow, not sluggish, careful in the way people get after they've seen the price of small sloppiness. She clipped the relay to her harness, cinched the strap, until it pressed the kestrel into bone. The rain had thinned to a mist that softened the world without promising anything. Sandy 1-1, this is Sapphire. Radio check. Her voice found its lane without hunting. Good check, Sapphire. The pilot sounded like a person who had slept enough to be dangerous again. We'll take your lane when you find it. She pictured the corridor she hadn't built yet, a space between weather and will. Basements, sirens, the ache behind the ribs where a body stores a day's ledger. None of it asked for permission to ride along. None of it needed to. Ops cut in, less brittle than usual. ROE unchanged. PID required. Collateral 0 at the school grid. Affirm. Rules were walls. Walls kept people honest when storms tried to sell other stories. She glanced at the ridge. Grass lay flat in patches and lifted in others undecided. The pressure trend line stopped listing and held. The new windsock lifted half an inch and thought about more. Sandy 1-1. Window opens in 60 seconds. She said to the future under her breath, testing the line in her mouth. The sentence felt like a tool now, not an omen. A private climbed into the truck with too much boot on the tailgate. He would bruise later and pretend he hadn't. Tessa handed up the Pelican and followed, pack straps settling across bones that had learned how to carry quiet. She tapped the strobe on her own chest. Steady diamond. Then looked once at the schoolhouse's dull mirror, a coin in the day's pocket. The convoy rolled. The rain quit. The air took on that metallic taste that meant it might try an old trick in a new way. Good. Let it. She had thresholds tuned mean and a pencil sharpened to behaviors. Her thumb found the radio's PTT and rested there without pressing, the way a pianist rests on keys before the first note tells the room what kind of day it will be. Sapphire up, she said, and the net made space for the words. The annex smelled like wet paper and toner. Rain had walked across the flight line at dawn and left the world clean in stripes. Inside the briefing hut, fluorescent light made the ink too sharp to be comfortable. Captain Tessa Klein scrolled a finger down the page until it found the new stanza. 3.7.4 Dust vertical outflow. Aggressive baro gust cue permitted at controller discretion. IR geometry talk on when visual PID degraded. Abort on flirt phraseology authorized to enforce ricochet ROE. Dogleg corridors permissible if grid protected. Her signature sat under it, plain as tape. She pressed the pen to the margin and felt the nib bite. The bite helped. You really want us flipping the gust alarms that low? A young JTAC asked from the second row. His boots were still new enough to squeak. Feels jumpy. Feels early, she said, keeping her voice narrow, clean. She thumbed a remote. The projector threw grainy footage across the canvas screen. Orange smoke pulling straight in a gray world. Tracers cupping a wall and stopping obediently where a sentence had told them to. Early buys decision. You can always call hold. You can't retrieve rounds. In the back, a pilot with a brand new patch leaned on a chair, arms crossed. Abort on flirt. You really want that in a cockpit checklist? It puts skin on a rule, she said. Pilots remember skin. A low laugh ran the wall. Even the patch smirked, unoffended. The door opened with a slap of damp air. Major Cole stepped in, rain on his shoulders. He set a folder on the lectern like a stone on a map. Hot pit in 20 for Sandy. Weather window, uncertain by noon. His eyes flicked toward her mast, leaning in the corner, windsock freshly taped. "You can push the annex from here, Captain, or ride forward and tutor the sky." The room waited in the small silence that makes choices loud. Tessa's hand found the edge of the paper and anchored there. The annex needed a face, a voice in rooms like this. The field needed the same voice in a different register, low, exact, without drum roll. Outside, a gust pressed the hut and let go. Her body counted 4 in, held, 4 out. Rest had a shape, so did purpose. They didn't fit in the same pocket. "Seat your caps," she told the room, and tapped the IR strobe on her own plate. "Quarter turn, no visible during dust. If you breathe weird, match your watch band." Half the class checked their watches without thinking about why. She signed the annex block, ink on doctrine, then slid the pen into the notebook's coil and closed it on the page where the words had been born messy, in pencil. She lifted the mast, its taped tongue bright as a warning, and slung her pack. The weight settled across bone where it knew the angles. Cole didn't say "I told you so." He only nodded once, the new kind of respect that has nothing to do with speeches. "Tower says overcast thickening. You'll want to hear it for yourself." The flight line breathed JP8 and wet concrete. An A-10 taxiing slow looked like a contradiction solved by stubbornness. The pilot with the helmet mark in her hair, Sandy 11, stood under a nacelle and watched the sky as if it were a person who might change its mind. She saw Tessa and lifted 2 fingers. "East-west?" Tessa answered with a small hook in the air. "Dogleg." The pilot nodded like she'd been thinking it already. "Radio check, Sapphire?" the pilot asked, voice warm iron in her ear as they walked. "We're taking a look at the same valley later. Ops wants a presence patrol that never ends up meaning presence." "Good check," Tessa said. She set the mast in a sleeve at the truck's rear and taped the guy line until the flag pulled true. Pressure on the Kestrel ticked down a fraction and held. The fraction mattered. They all did. A specialist hustled past with a crate of chem lights, nearly clipping the mast. "Sorry, ma'am." "Don't be," she said, and pointed at his strobe. "Seat it." He did. The diamond blinked steady. Obedient light in a world that enjoyed lies. Ops radioed a fragment of need no one cared to wrap in narrative. Patrol pinned 2 ridgelines south of yesterday's school. Grid different, rule the same. PID required. CDE 0 near protected structures. Abort if PID lost. Her ribs knew the weight of those letters better than her eyes did. "Still want the desk?" Cole asked at her shoulder dry. "I'll send notes from the valley," she said. "Copy," he said, and didn't try to smile. The wind tugged his sleeve and he let it. They rolled. The rain thinned to mist. The ridge wore a sash of ragged cloud like a habit it was trying to quit. Grass patches lay flat, then lifted indecisively. The Kestrel chirped once. Barrow drop, not much, enough to move thought from if to when. "Sky's got the same bad posture," the pilot said on AUX, more to herself than the net. "We'll be here when your door opens." "Doors aren't mine," Tessa said, and tightened her harness a notch until plastic pressed the Kestrel against bone. "I just named them." The road cut toward the familiar valley mouth, now a new room with the furniture pushed around. In the side mirror, the mast's taped tongue fluttered and then held. The truck's cab smelled like oil and the paper wrapper from someone's long-gone sandwich. A corporal at the wheel kept glancing at his strobe without knowing he was doing it. The blink kept time for him. At the wadi, she stepped down into grit that stuck to damp boots and made the ground taller by a rude fraction. The school that was not yesterday's school stood dull and reflective, Innocence for rent. She marked a ring on the map without being asked. The pencil left a circle that bit into laminate. A new door would need a new hinge. The radio warmed the side of her jaw where skin thinned over bone. Sandy 1-1 on station, the pilot said, steady as a level horizon. We'll take your lane when you find it. Copy. Tessa raised her head and watched a seam along the ridge think about lifting. The count in her ribs clicked to 4 on its own. The room inside Weather waited for someone to speak first. Sapphire up, she said, and the net made space, and the day leaned in to listen.